the question?
Isn't it about like people
Do you want me to answer the
giving each
question?
other rights?
No, it's definitely not. The argument, justice from each individual's own perspective would grant rights to animals because they confer valid things from their own perspective.
It would confer
Rights
rights
are
to
just
animals.
entitlements.
So your perspective would confer rights to animals.
Not my perspective. My perspective would confer value on myself because I just.
But how does that mean? How
Animals
could
from
that
their
work in
perspective.
society? How could that work in rights? Right? If everyone thinks they're valuable, how does that mean that rights work? Aren't rights entitlements against people acting in a way that would interfere with yourself?
It's like they have a right to not be treated wrongly.
Right,
That's
but
what
that
entitlement is.
depends on other people doing that, right? They can't not treat themselves wrongly.
No, not necessarily. Right. The course code evidence right here.
Okay.
What's
So what's a
important-
right? What's the definition of a right? Can you show me that?
An entitlement.
Entitlement to what? To your own entitlement to yourself?
It just endorses a certain view what may, must, and must not be done.
Entitlements that others not perform certain actions. Where do you ever justify that others ought not perform actions upon animals? We don't say their entitlements that others not perform certain actions do not be in certain states.
Right. Animals deserve not to be in a state
others
where
not
they're treated wrongly. Right.
Right, by others.
And they won't be treated
Okay,
wrongly
that's
if we
fine.
confer
Thank
value
you.
on them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Do you defend rights as violable or inviolable, or will you accept like my interpretation?
Well, the analysis here says that we don't take a stance on the content or stringency of those entitlements.
What does that mean?
Like, that's like an irrelevant question to the resolution.
Why is it irrelevant?
Because the question of resolution is just whether justice requires a recognition of the rights. It's not a question of which rights animals have or whether
Okay.
they're valid, right? Because rights are just entitlements.
But you never answer what entitlements are, right?
What?
But is the entitlement that others not perform actions? Doesn't that mean that it is inviolable? If you're entitled to someone not doing something to you,
You're not understanding what the evidence says.
I
All it says
get
is
that I'm not understanding anything, but like, can you explain
I mean,
to me
it's pretty
so
straightforward.
I can understand?
It's pretty straightforward. The case. It's very simple.
Okay.
The document says that just not a mind independent reality. Answers are not written on a stone
Okay.
tablet.
What is
right?
the
It's
Roland's
conjunctive
argument at the
solutions.
bottom? Is this the veil of ignorance argument?
Which one?
The Roland's argument?
It just says that knowledge of one's own rationality is bracketed. In,
What does that mean?
in
What is
the
the
original's
implication?
position.
What is that implication?
That like behind a veil of ignorance, we wouldn't care about one's own rationality.
You didn't care about your own rationality? So how can that jive with constructivism if constructivism is about caring about your point of view?
I don't see how it's inconsistent.
Can you explain to me why it's consistent? If you care about your point of view, but then you don't care about your rationality, how does that make sense?
No, we don't care about rationality, right? Because we look at things from our own perspective.
So what does that have to do with animals?
It's Rawls and constructivism. It's completely consistent.
What does that have to do with animals?
What?
What is the implication? Does that be the offense?
No, it's just a preempt.
A preempt to what?
Preempt of contrarianism.
So if I don't run Rawls, that doesn't matter, right?
No.
Okay, thank you. And Reagan just says animals have cognitive interests.
They have psychological capacities.
Okay, what does that mean? What is the implication of having psychological capacity? And what's the warrant? Did he do a study or something?
The evidence indicates that they have mental capacity that play a role in how they behave. Other animals will behave in one way rather than another because they remember which ways of acting had pleasant outcomes in the past because they're afraid or sad.
Wait,
So they have psychological complexity, which
How do we know that
plays
they're
an
sad?
important role in arguing for the rights.
How do we
right?
know they're sad? It says that because they're afraid or sad, they remember which ways of acting.
I mean,
how do we know they're
it
sad?
speaks to their experiences, right?
How do we know what their experiences are if we only take into account our point of view?
From their own perspective, their
But they can't take
experiences
their
are
own
wrong.
experiences into account to give
Why?
themselves. Okay, all right,
That makes sense to me.
all right. I have 30. Actually, no. I'll take a little bit more.
All
Yep.
time's up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. It's gonna be NC counterplan AC.
I'm sorry, so no prep left?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
NC counterplan AC.
Okay.
You guys ready?
Mm-hmm. You ready?
Okay. I negate and value justice. Our obligations are only intelligible within shared moral communities because they situate our identities in interest haste. The meaning of our morality depends on what is recognized within a social community. Social beings create their identity through shared discourse and language. Communities offer us identity, meaning moral obligation can only have meaning within the social context. For example, practice may be widely condemned, but for different reasons. Believing the rape is wrong because it defies victim's purity is very different from seeing it as wrong because it treats her as an object rather than a person with recognition. Possession of rights depends on the inclusion being the question of shared moral community. Fox 1. Having rights and describing them to others for the mutual recognition that occurs within the social group. Members of the social group recognize that others in the group says moral person for the description of rights expressed in symbolic form. The result they should be treated in an appropriate to the autonomy of personhood thus perceive the rights belong to their moral agents within the community, which responsibility and accountability is central. The criterion for recognition of rights is demonstrating membership in the moral community. Fox 2 explains what this means. Because they belong in the moral community must be by the nation capable of functioning within them. They must possess the ability to manipulate concepts, use language, and purpose of communicating wishes, desires, and choices, capacity, reflect, choosing, accept responsibility for acting, possession of those characteristics, plus capacity, recognizing others, explains what we mean by speaking for ourselves as a person. Moral community is a social group of which we recognize the mutual recognition of personhood existence, development of moral institutions contingent upon the recognition of the person. The implication is first of all the rights necessarily involve mutual recognition of relationships. Remember, his definition of rights says is that others do not treat you in a certain way. That doesn't mean that you can't just value your own perspective because it requires you valuing other people's perspective because it requires you to not interfere in their affairs because that's the only way the right functions. That's with his definition. Then I contend that animals are not capable of being members of our moral community. First, we cannot recognize animals as rights holders because they are not capable of making moral claims against us, not capable of responding to obligation to Cohen. Rights arise only among beings who can make moral claims against one another. They are necessarily human. Animals are beings capable of experiencing and responding to moral claims. Holds rights must have capacity to comprehend rules of duty governing all in the community. The beings capable of self-restricting judgment, the cost of right being invoked. Humans are members of the communities governed by moral rules. We must not infer that being has simply being life rights with life. Second, we cannot recognize animal rights because they are unable to engage in moral dialogue. Francis. The degree of human communication makes it possible for human beings to identify with one another, they can imagine themselves and show the position. They can also justify themselves to one another. None of this applies to animals. The rudimentary levels of communication between human beings and animals make possible no more than sympathy apply to the animal. Any more developed identification with the experiences of an animal would more likely be upon fancy. That means we cannot, in terms of our social community, we cannot have mutual recognition of rights because we would not make sense to, in terms of a system of justice. Then, counterpoint. I value justice means standards. Actually. Rights are only meaningful if it's enforced by legal straight. Any rights-based theory assumes a particular principle holding that the most important consideration for granting what that right is, whether or not it's actually upheld. Cochrane. This interacts with his arguments in the AC about that we don't need to actually enforce the rights or evaluate the stringency of the rights. He never gives a warrant for that argument. Cochrane explains. Animal rights are founded on the institution of the right holder. This benefits the essential features that it benefits the right holder from the notion of animal rights to be coherent. They have to be based on an interest-based approach. Animals should be assigned rights not for symbolic purposes because they are not real limits. What can be done to an individual. He continues. Moral rights are meant to provide normative foundations for the description of rights in the legislation. Calls for the recognition of animal rights. Calls for legal rights. Finally, since ideal theories of justice are flawed, I take or he says we cannot have a priori moral principle. Justice is a concept ought to instead focus on rectifying injustice that are currently taking place. It's not a wholesale reaction to the affirmative program, rather a formulation of it. So I accept the assumption that suffering is wrong, but ultimately this all matters to improve the actual lived experience of those animals. More mutually exclusive alternative. My argument is that the only way you can make sense in terms of rights is that they actually enforce, because otherwise it doesn't jive even with his definition about something that somebody else ought not do to you, i.e. non-interference. That's the text of my counter-advocacy that justice requires recognition of animal welfare. This competes in two ways. First is mutual exclusivity. Animal welfare and animal rights are philosophically opposed doctrines. Animal rights creates its own inviolability around animals where they're inalienable and just cannot be violated, whereas welfare recognizes the animal suffering must be reduced as much as possible, but they may be used and conceived by humans. Show. Animal welfare is founded on the premise that animals can be used to benefit humans. Obligation for humans toward animals include provision of sensitive food, water, and shelter. Any alleviation of suffering. Animal rights are different. Animal rights are not considered human character of the animal. Animal rights supports belief that animals not to be exploited for any purpose. Implementing the philosophy of being eliminating the use of animal for food, clothing, leisure, research purposes. Also, for my interpretation of these questions, because I'm providing the only definitions that what it actually means to have animal rights. Remember, his definition is just what rights are, but not what animal rights mean in terms of literature. He just excludes different arguments without providing warrants, whereas I'm actually giving hard responses. Then. Second is net benefit. Subpoint A is reduction of suffering. The attempt to implement animal rights alienates government officials and public large attempt to impose radical general law. This is the cause of animal welfare back by 100 years. On the other hand, animal welfare is shown to be popular in both civil society. This card claims all of that. Garner. The radical demands of the animal rights movement are not acceptable enough for government to consider granting it consultative status. Animal welfare groups are working in the mainstream more likely to be insulted. They advantages and compromise approach first. Improvements to the way animals are treated become possible in the short term. These reforms are short of its what's demanded by animal rights activists, but they go toward the aim failure to engage in realistic dialogue with government parties and will result in fewer weaker measures that if it was a successful animal welfare that precipitated the commitment to the reform of law related to the arbitrary use of animals standing looped in principle of isolation. We very one's hand in hand. The end result would be the scientists would get the kind of legislation they want, which may last for another 100 years. Second, this is still only the evidence. Such a strategy will not succeed in the radical demands simply not acceptable to government and the public in general. Third, the failure to accept the realities of politics damages the case that those who negotiate and compromise much could have been achieved had the animal movement put its weight behind a realistic proposal. When the animal scientific procedures bill were being formulated, public campaigns should not have any too far. Subpoint B is rights retrenchment. Actually, no. I'm not going to have subpoint B. Comparatively negative advocacy is always better than animal rights. Constance with Gardner Evans clearly says the animal welfare movement has been empirically better for animals. The rights movement, however, how to do that sufficient for to negate the fact that animal welfare legislation has been around for decades shows that the risk of the backslide of the welfare movement is virtually zero compared by the extreme likelihood of retrenchment for people trying popular animal rights policies. Then, go to the AC. First is no to the AC. The AC never affirms because his claim is that we never have to recognize other people's rights if we actually recognize animal rights, i.e. animals value their own rights. But that does not interact with his definition. His definition says we have to recognize others' rights, which means that his justifications are never actually sufficient to be able to prove animal rights in the first place. Then, I can see the street evidence. It just says that normative anti-realism is true. That there are no a priori moral facts. My argument is that there are no a priori moral facts. It's that we just have to formulate those within the social community in terms of accounting for a system of justice. So whenever we formulate those facts within the moral community,